I'm Ben Van Gelderen, the Business Squad's Legal Eagle, and welcome to my Case of the Week. This week we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Last week I talked a lot about how these executive agencies really have home court advantage, pun intended, when you go to court and they've already made a decision because the court really defers to them. And this week, you're going to see a lot of content on a bunch of new regulations that are very harsh and are really going to impact a lot of businesses. So keep an eye on the other Business Squad content for more information about that. But I thought this week I would talk about a situation where the agency lost and talk about some of the checks on these agencies being able to come in and do basically whatever they want. And it's actually not quite a Supreme Court case because it actually settled before it was even a court case at all. But basically, I'm just going to be kind of telling an anecdote about a situation where there was an agency regulation that was unfair and illegal, and some attorneys got together a class action lawsuit challenging it, and they essentially won because the agency settled out of court. But it doesn't really give any case law or any precedent that we can use to sort of say these are the rules, but they show and illustrate some well-established principles. So what I'm going to be talking about is the Michigan's Health Professionals Recovery Program. So a few years ago, the Michigan Senate passed a law that said that the licensing agencies have to come up with some sort of halfway program for healthcare licensees, doctors, nurses, whatever, that run into substance abuse issues and that causes an impact on their license. And they wanted to establish some sort of program where these people could get the help that they needed without just automatically losing their license and facing all these sanctions and penalties and fines. So the law basically said, this is what we want to do, this is why we want to do it, so promulgate rules and regulations and basically figure it out. So what Lara did is they founded the Health Professional Recoveries Program, which was a program where professionals that had a license complaint that related to substance abuse issues would be diverted to the Health Professionals Recovery Program. And as long as they participated in that program successfully, there was no complaint on their license, there was no public record, and everything sort of went away. So that sounds like an absolutely wonderful, perfect program, right? Well, to illustrate the problems, I'm going to kind of take an example. And I have had clients that have dealt with the Health Professional Recovery Program, but I'm just going to be making a story up completely out of nowhere, so this isn't actually based on anybody. But let's say you've got a physician who meets some longtime friends for lunch, right? And they end up going to a brewery or one of these bar and grills or something like that, right? And so the physician has a beer with his lunch. Maybe he has a couple of beers. Maybe he hasn't seen these friends in a long time. For whatever reason, he's got a lapse in judgment, and so he goes back to the office drunk, basically, right? Somehow that gets found out. So what would happen is somebody files a complaint against his license, and it gets diverted to the Health Professionals Recovery Program. The Health Professional Recovery Program, they come in, they send therapists, they sit down, they talk to him, they figure out all this stuff. And then they send him in the mail like a 15-page contract that basically says, you have to follow all of these rules, you have to do all of these things, or we're going to take your license away. And that includes 3 years of AA, 3 years of drug testing, 3 years of mandatory therapy, all these crazy requirements. And, maybe this physician is an alcoholic and does need this intervention, but maybe he just had a one-time lapse in judgment, right? And so let's assume that this really is somebody that just made a one-time major mistake, right? And let's make this more complicated, right? Maybe when they went in for a drug test, he actually tested positive for marijuana because he smoked a joint over the weekend or something like that. But you can see the situation where somebody who has a short, limited lapse in judgment, all of a sudden the Health Professional Recovery Program and says, here's this long, complicated 15-page agreement that establishes everything that you have to do. And, oh, by the way, if you violate it at any time, we're filing a complaint against your license. And, oh, by the way, if you don't sign this agreement, we're filing a complaint against your license. So the physician looks at it and says, you know what, I don't want to do this. I'm going to take my chances with the licensing board. I'm going to take my sanctions. I'm going to take my discipline. And then I'm going to move on. I'm not going to drag this out over 3 years. The problem came when Lara started receiving these reports from the Health Professionals Recovery Program and automatically sanctioning the physicians and taking away their license. So the physician who doesn't sign the MHRP contract, right, just waits to see what happens, and then he gets a letter that says your license is suspended. So what happened is some attorneys got together, a whole bunch of people that were in the situation like our physician, where they, for whatever reason, they didn't want to participate in the Michigan Health Professionals Recovery Program, and so Laura automatically suspended their license. And basically, the legal argument was that Laura has all of their authority comes from the legislature. The legislature passed a law that says Laura's job is to license all these different professions, all these different health professionals. And Laura has the ability to take away their licenses or suspend their licenses if they think they present a threat or a danger to the safety or welfare of the people of the state of Michigan. And there's also a constitutional due process issue that I won't really get into, except to say that because it's the doctor's livelihoods, they have a right to due process of law, hearing, whatever, about that. And so Laura promulgated all these rules and regulations that says when we suspend somebody's license, this is how we do it, and this is how we prove that somebody presents a harmful, a threat to people, or however it happens, right? And so when Laura didn't do that with this Health Professionals Recovery Program, that voided all the suspensions, right? Because they were skipping the hearing. They weren't giving the physicians a chance to come in and explain what happened. They didn't go through the process, and they weren't following their own rules that they had promulgated. So that's why they settled out of court, and they are now reworking the process of how issues get presented from the Health Professionals Recovery Program. So to sum up, right, the agency has all these rules and regulations that they have to come up with. And so that also means they have to follow them. And when they don't follow them, it voids basically all of their actions. So when they suspend a complaint without going through their hearing process and without proving all, X, Y, Z, which their rules say they have to prove, the suspension is overturned. So the two things to really take away from this week's case of the week is the first thing is that if you or if anybody you know has been contacted by the Michigan Health Recovery Program, you should definitely contact me because I can help you look at the agreement and figure out what the right path is for you, whether it's this recovery program or whether you're better off taking the complaint in front of a judge. And the second thing is to keep in mind that these agency regulations are really a double-edged sword because on the one hand, they are really harsh and very black and white and put a lot of burdens on the employers, on the licensees, on whoever's impacted by these regulations to follow them. But on the other hand, the agency has to follow these regulations too. And if they don't, then they lose just like everybody else does. So it's a very complicated regulatory system that we have, and these last two cases of the weeks have just been very, very scratching the surface on this issue. But hopefully they give you a little bit of a better sense of where these rules come from. Remember, keep an eye on the Business Squad content this week, especially for our happy hour show on Thursday at 5 p.m. because we're going to be talking about some new Department of Labor regulations that are supposed to be coming out this week that are really going to change the way overtime is calculated, specifically relating to the exemptions. And as always, I will see you next week.